Welcome everyone to our first Tito CEDH League. The rules are simple. First player to win 2 games takes the lead. Let's meet our contenders. I am piloting Zur the Enchanter. My aim is to get a Necropotence into the battlefield, draw my library, and cast Shimmer Mirror at the end step, casting all my artifacts and blasting everyone with Etherflux Reservoir. Dino is piloting his signature Urza High Artificer. His aim is to assemble his infinite mana combo and cast his deck via Urza's ability and win with Jace, Wielder of Mysteries. In the same manner, Christian comes in with his famous Tymna and Thrasios partner commanders. His aim is to mill his own deck via Hermit Druid and win with Laboratory Maniac effects. And finally, Jeff with his Rielle the Ever Once. He aims to abuse his discard strategy with the commander to fuel his graveyard and win with a Brain Freeze, Thassa's Oracle combo via Underworld Breach. With that out of the way, time to switch to my mellow voice for the gameplay. Christian goes first, draws for the turn, plays Polluted Delta, cracks, takes 1 damage, fetches for Tropical Island, and proceeds to catch the fish, Mystic Remora. Altered Art, of course, then passes the turn. Jeff draws for the turn, plays a snow-covered island, then he casts Ponder. Mystic Remora triggers, Christian of course draws a card, Ponder resolves, Jeff puts back 3 cards, then draws a card. Passes the turn. Dino draws for the turn. He then plays Ancient Tomb, immediately taps for 2 mana, takes 2 damage, and plays Fractured Power Stone. Christian draws a card from Mystic Remora and passes the turn. I draw for the turn. I play Command Tower, Sadness resolves, and passes the turn. Turn 2, Christian untaps and pays for Mystic Remora, cumulative upkeep costs 1, draws for the turn, and then plays his City of Brass. Passes the turn. Jeff draws for the turn, plays Forgotten Cave, then passes the turn. Dino untaps and draws for the turn. He then plays Snow-Covered Island and casts his Rhystic Study, taking 2 from Ancient Tomb. Mystic Remora triggers, Christian draws a card, and they both pass the turn. So it's my turn. I draw a card and play an island. Passes the turn. Christian untaps and pays for Rhystic Remora, cumulative upkeep 2, takes 1 damage from City of Brass. He draws for the turn, plays Verdant Catacombs, fetches for an Overgrown Tomb, and takes 3 damage overall. He now proceeds to play a Llanowar Elf. Cannot pay for Rhystic Study tax. Dino draws a card. And passes the turn. Jeff untaps and draws for the turn. He then proceeds to cast Thrill of Possibility, pitching and evacuate. Both Rhystic and Mystic Remora triggers. No tax was paid. Both Dino and Christian draws a card. Thrill of Possibility resolves. Jeff draws 2 cards. He then plays a Snow-Covered Island and passes the turn. Dino untaps and draws for the turn. He plays a Snow-Covered Island and casts a Mind Stone with Ancient Tomb, taking 2 damage. Mystic Remora triggers, then Christian draws a card. Dino deliberates a little bit and decides to risk it. He then casts his commander, Urza High Artificer. Commander resolves, puts a construct into play, and passes for turn. I draw a card for turn. I play Gemstone Cavern, then casts my Demonic Tutor. Both Rhystic and Mystic Remora triggers. No tax was paid. Both Dino and Christian draws a card. My Tutor resolves, and I get a Chromox. I am Landlight, so I have to do that. Turn 4. Christian untaps and doesn't pay for Mystic Remora, which is then sacrificed. Buy fish, draws for the turn, plays a Scrubland for the turn, and he casts his preordained Rhystic Study triggers. no tax was paid, and Dino draws a card. Christian then now scries 2, puts them on the bottom, and draws a card. He proceeds to discard Ponder, Exotic Orchard, and Noxious Revival. Then passes the turn. Jeff untaps and draws for the turn. He then proceeds to cast Mana Crypt. Rhystic Study triggers, no tax was paid, and Dino draws yet another card. Jeff then deliberates and casts his Rielle, the Ever-Wise. Again, no tax being paid, Dino draws yet another card. Jeff then casts his Jace, Vryn's Prodigy. Dino again triggers his Rhystic Study and draws a card. Jeff then passes his turn. Dino untaps and draws for the turn. With the amount of cards he has accumulated in Rhystic Study, he is now ready to battle. He begins by casting Back to Basics, which would devastate Christian's board. He takes 2 from the Ancient Tomb. Christian, forced to do it, he now casts his Dovin Veto, countering the Back to Basics. He also pays for Rhystic Study trigger. Back to Basics is put into the graveyard. Dino now follows it up by putting a snow-covered island into play and casts an Isochron Scepter. I have no significant response and passes priority to Christian, which then responds with his Force of Will, taking 1 damage and pitching Delay. He also pays for Rhystic Study tax. Dino fights back with his own counterspell and casts Mana Drain, targeting Christian's Force of Will. Priority is now back my way, and I'm happily to contribute with a Force Spike, targeting Dino's Mana Drain. I'm not able to pay Rhystic Study tax, so Dino can now draw a card. He then clapped back with his own Force of Will, pitching a blue card, and takes 1 damage. All hope might be lost between Christian and I. However, Jeff comes out of nowhere and responds with his own Force of Will, pitching a Tolarian Winds, and saves the day. Jeff cannot pay the Rhystic Study tax. Dino draws a card. Dino is not yet done. He then casts his own Mox Diamond, pitching a snow-covered island, and proceeds to cast Fellwar Stone, ramping even further. And finally, passes the turn. I untap and draw for the turn. Landlight, I am forced to cast my Chrome Mox. Rhystic Study triggers, no tax was paid, so Dino draws a card. I imprint a Cabal Ritual, and now proceeds to cast my Commander. After all the counter wars that occurred, the coast is clear, and casts Zur, the Enchanter. Dino yet again draws a card from Rhystic Study because I'm unable to pay. Turn 5, Christian untaps and draws a card for turn, then passes the turn. Jeff missequenced a little bit, but we should be okay. Untap and draw for the turn. He then coin flip for the Mana Crypt. Heads is even, he won. On his main phase, he then casts Brainstorm, paying for Rhystic Study from the Mana Crypt. 1 colorless mana floating. He then proceeds to draw 3 cards and returns 2 cards. Jeff then proceeds to cast Talisman of Creativity, this time not paying for Rhystic Study. He now draws a card. Jeff then activates his Jace, draws a card, and discards a card. He draws another card from Rielle, then passes the turn. Dino untaps and draws for the turn, and plays a Sanctum of Eternity. He then casts Memory Jar, using Ancient Tomb, which would deal 2 damage to him. This is a good play because he's anticipating a Necropotence turn on my end. He then passes the turn. I untap for the turn and draws a card. For anything else, I swing my commander at Dino. Zor the Enchanter triggers, and that trigger is now on the stack. While the trigger is on the stack, Dino responds by cracking Memory Jar. We set aside our hand and draws 7 cards. Now, at this point, I believe he wants to let me draw the Necropotence so that Zor can fetch the Necropotence. I look at my hand. I have a couple of good cards on my hand, but no Necropotence, so I'm able to fetch Necropotence by Zor. I then proceed on my second main phase. I play an island. I then cast Narset, Parter of Veils, which would devastate Jeff. Jeff needs to respond, but before that, Dino draws a card from Rustic Study Text. Jeff counters with Fierce Guardianship, which was also not able to pay Rustic Study Text. Dino draws yet another card. Narset is countered and is now in the graveyard. I cast a Lotus Petal, not paying for the tax. Rustic Study triggers, Dino draws a card, and I proceed to use Lotus Petal, sacrifice it, and casts Detention Sphere. Detention Sphere is on the stack. Rustic Study triggers, Dino draws yet another card. Everybody yet resolves the Detention Sphere, and I target Urza, High Artificer. Then I proceed to take 7 for Necropotence so I can draw 7 cards. On my end step, Christian then exiles an Elvish Spirit Guide and casts an Abrupt Decay targeting Rustic Study. And he also pays for the Rustic Study tax. Rustic is now finally destroyed and goes into the graveyard. We now resolve Memory Jar's triggers. Everybody discards their hand. Rielle also triggers after discarding, which draws 6 additional cards for Jeff. My Necropotence now resolves, and I put those 7 cards from exile to my hand, and I decide to discard to hand size. And finally, passes the turn. Turn 6, Christian untaps and draws a card for the turn. He then plays Windswept Heath, then searches for a Breeding Pool untapped, taking 3 damage. He deliberates, and then thinks about casting an Eladamri's Call. He searches his library for a Hermit Druid, which is crucial to his combo. Thinks about it, and decides to cast the Hermit Druid, risking Counterspell. Jeff is first to respond and counters with a Counterspell. The classics. Christian then thinks about it and lets the Druid be countered. Passes the turn. Jeff now untaps and draws a card for turn. He plays a Misty Rainforest and cracks it. He searches for a Steam Vents untapped. Jeff missequenced a little bit and now is rolling for Mana Crypt. Odd is Tails, so he lost and takes an additional 3 damage. He now proceeds to play Fateless Looting to draw 2 cards and then discard 2 cards. Rielle abilities triggers, and then he now draws an additional 2 cards. Jeff taps an Ancient Tomb and takes 2 damage, floats 2 colorless mana. He then proceeds to cast a Mox Diamond, pitching a snow-covered mountain. He then uses that Mox Diamond and the colorless floating mana to cast Darkside Extortionist. Dino needs to counter and cast Arcane Denial. In response, Jeff triggers Jace Vryn's Prodigy, draws a card, then discards a card, and flips Jace. Jeff follows up with Deflecting Swat. No more counter spells are on site. I am fully tapped. And Darkside Extortionist resolves. He now creates 8 treasure tokens because of the artifacts and enchantments in play. Jeff now proceeds to activate Jace Telepath Unbound, targeting Fierce Guardian's ship, protecting his combo. Jeff then casts his Mana Vault, taps it, and produces 3 additional colorless mana, making 4 colorless mana floating overall. Taps a blue mana to cast Recall, pitching Thassa's Oracle. Recall resolves, and he returns Spell Seeker. Puts Spell Seeker on hand and casts Spell Seeker, searching for Muddle the Mixture. He proceeds then to cast or transmutes Muddle the Mixture, searching for a 2-2 cast spell, and proceeds to take Underworld Breach. Underworld Breach is now on hand, and he now uses the treasure to cast Underworld Breach. Here's Jeff to go through the game.
LED is in hand, and then since Underworld Breach is also here, so I'm going to crack the LED, discard my hand, then cast the LED, exile 3
cards.
3 cards, crack the LED, exile the LED, crack the LED, exile the LED. 1, 2, 3, 4. So 4 sap, okay? Cast the Faithless Looting, draw 2, discard 2, using the 3 mana flashback lang. Okay, draw 2, discard 2. Cast the Brainstorm, card 3. 1, 2, 3.
Okay.
Okay. Draw 3. 1, 2, 3. Returning 2. Okay. Using 2 of the mana from the LED, I will Brain Freeze myself.
There you have it. Impressive gameplay by the players. However, we made 2 mistakes. See if you can find those 2 game mechanic errors. This is part 1 of the league. Keep an eye on the next gameplays. And if you enjoy this video, check out all of my other deck tech and gameplay videos here. And if you like budget streaming, I also have it right here. Stay safe.